Everybody, welcome to Polytech. This is Dale. I am your host. Took a little bit of a break for a few weeks from all the rush of information coming out and political spaghetti and rubbish that is being released across social media, across the administration, and just a lot of things that I think went through my mind during the past week of what was important to talk about. How could I get the message across clearly? What is one of the major points that we really need to think about and that we really need to act on and make sure that we're not being fooled by the misinformation, propaganda coming out of the administration, the current administration? There's so much that's going on. We have the Epstein files that are happening. There's a lot of debate on the president is buckling down on, and even though his name is mentioned more than 1,000 times within those documents, is now spreading propaganda about it being a hoax from the Democrats and a witch hunt after him to try to frame him. So, we've had a lot of things going through the cycle. And what's concerned me the most this week, which kind of brought me out of an early, I need a break type of thing from doing a podcast, is a statement that he released during a press conference when he was asked a question about nationalization of the U.S. elections. And before we actually jump into that, I want to validate myself just a little bit so people understand where I'm coming from when it comes from voting security, voting machine security, the processes they go through. So I've been involved with politics for quite some time. I've worked on 4 presidential campaigns. I've worked on a handful of Senate congressional campaigns, gubernatorial campaign. And in my roles there, I handled security. And in some cases, I would handle the process of combating misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda to a certain degree. And the losing battle is, it feels like a losing battle, at least unless you approach it in a way that you're not killing yourself trying to get across to people. And the big mistake we make is, jumping on social media and responding back or trying to respond back to every individual that doesn't understand processes, doesn't understand how the government works, or they are just so brainwashed that there's no turning them around. And no matter what you do, or no matter what proof you have, and receipts you have, they're just not going to believe you. And then they turn over to personal assaults, researching you, and finding nothing, but then making up things. So it's just an interesting process. Why I do this, sometimes I think about it, and I do it because I know that the people need the truth. Um, And sometimes in the world that we live in, especially now with AI, the propaganda that can be turned out is so confusing and realistic. And the speed of the internet, World Wide Web, and social media tends to push propaganda at warp speed, and it's hard to combat. So I've come to the realization that the only way that I'm going to be effective at this point is to do these podcasts, to write my articles and post them as much as possible. And that's the only way we can do it. And to do the research, to stop and really look at what information is out there and research that information, because you're going to find when you do go on social media, things that people are posting that look legitimate, right? So they're going to post Fox News, CNN with all of these different approval ratings or whatever it may be. But if you don't double check those things, you're going to find that many of those are inaccurate. Well, let's get on to the point for today. I want to talk about, and I'm going to play this press conference with Trump being asked by the press corps a few questions about nationalization of U.S. elections. And then I'm going to come back. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. So go ahead and let's watch this clip.
Thank you for taking our questions. What exactly did you mean when you said that you should nationalize elections? And which 15 states are you talking
I
about?
want to see elections be honest. And if a state can't run an election, I think the people behind me should do something about it.
So I want to go over this clip a little bit. And these are serious accusations that Trump is making. Unfortunately, they're not legitimate, they're not true, and they hold no basis. So I kind of want to cover some of these things. So one of the things that Trump actually talks about in here, and he mentions it very clearly, is that the states act as an agent for the federal government during elections, or just only to conduct the elections and nothing else with that. So this is factually incorrect. Under the Constitution, elections are administered by the states, not as an agent of the federal government, not even close to what the statement he made, but they act as a sovereign authority over the elections and the counting of and security of all voting that comes through. This is part of Article 1, Section 4, and it explicitly grants the states the power to run elections while allowing Congress to regulate standards for that. And that's where we're going to talk about in a separate podcast because it goes very in depth. That's where the danger comes in when we allow new laws to be written that would somehow allow nationalization of federal elections. So we'll talk about that during another one. This decentralized system that we have in place right now is intentionally designed to prevent things like a single politician, aka Trump, in controlling the nation's elections and being able to manipulate it in many different ways. So it protects against things like corruption, manipulation, and authoritarian power grabs that will take place. So king for life type of a thing. So Trump also claimed that the elections in cities like Detroit, Atlanta, and across Pennsylvania were rigged. They were crooked. They were corrupt. And especially for some reason, and many of you may have your own ideas of why he's doing this. I know why he's doing it, especially referring to the 2020 elections. But in the same sentence, he also says also the most current elections, but he is not investigating the most current elections. And why is that? It's because he won. That's Trump's revenge tour, as I like to call it, getting back at people. So let's just examine the facts. Let's just stick directly to the facts without my opinion on anything else with this, although I'm full of opinions. But I want to attack this step by step, and let's examine the facts with. So the following 2020 elections, more than more than 60 lawsuits were filed, and they were challenging the elections, many of them directly from the Trump campaign. These cases were reviewed by the court. They went to the Supreme Court. They included judges both put in place by the Republicans and the Democratic presidency, including Trump himself, who had put some of these people in. In every case, it failed to bring forward any evidence of fraud or misconduct in counting or collecting ballots and information. So keep that in mind. In addition to this, right, the Department of Justice under Trump now states the election was the most secure in American history. And if you go back and listen to some of my other podcasts about security of voting machines, it'll be clear to you that it is almost impossible, if all the processes are followed and all of the security is followed, that the machines can be compromised. Republican election officials in country states like Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, and Pennsylvania confirmed their results and proven their results are and the integrity of their results are good. I mean, there were also multiple recounts done throughout that time that all came out with the same conclusion. Everything was accurate. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency found no fraud after multiple investigations done on it and confirmed over probably 2 or 3 different investigations that they conducted over that period of time. So Trump repeatedly points to urban areas with large black populations, Detroit, Atlanta, Philadelphia, as the pattern of corruption that he's talking about. Yet no credible evidence has ever come up or been produced through multiple investigations by multiple different agencies and private agencies as well to support any one of these claims that Trump has come up with. So this pattern that he's talking about does not exist. But what does exist is a pattern of misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda that he has been putting out and his administration has been putting out to grab a lie and try to bring it into reality to prove that he is right, although he has been lying. So now let's address the claims elections are horribly run. In his own words, quote unquote, horribly run. Yes, elections in America faces challenges, right? Things like aging equipment, understanding election offices, staffing shortages, and voter access issues are real problems that do exist. And I'll admit that first, I've been involved with this firsthand, so I understand how these things can be of concern. But the administration's allegations of administrative challenges are not fraud. These things are part of any election process and any voting process as well. It is addressed. There are safe loops for this. There are backups for certain things. So all of these issues and challenges I feel, or not feel, but I know exist, all have a redundancy or backup to it or a solution for this. Elections, voting, are all well thought. Any issues or problems that arise are well thought, and there are solutions already built into any scenario that may happen during a voting process or during an election day or with an election period in time. But Trump argues that the elections are imperfect, and they are imperfect, but they're not imperfect to the point where we're seeing huge gaps in numbers or a huge increase in fraud that he's talking about. Anything that Trump talks about is like the guy who went fishing who caught a fish about this big and says that it was that big and takes that fish and holds it closer to the camera so it looks bigger. That is the mentality that Trump has, and that's his process of how to do things. But this idea is extremely dangerous, and he knows it is. It causes fear, it causes disillusion in people who are thinking that the vote that they put in is not going to be counted, and therefore it's going to stop people from going out and voting, because what's the sense of voting if it's all fraudulent and it's not real? So federalization of elections would centralize control over ballots, ballot counting, certification, placing enormous power in the hands of one party in Washington, or AKA an administration or a king that is sitting in the White House right now. This would dramatically increase the risks of political interference dramatically. So this idea is extremely dangerous. Federalizing elections would centralize control over the ballot counting, certification, placing enormous power into the hands of whichever party is actually in control of this, and weaponizing the information for it and using their authoritarian abuse to have outcomes that are not true to the voting of the American people. The founders intentionally avoided centralization of election control because they understood this exact danger that would happen. So let's talk the truth. Election security does not come from the federal takeover. It comes from the following things, and everybody who's going to do their research, and please do your research, even on what I'm talking about myself here, because you need to be able to take on the responsibility of checking information. So let's look at where it comes from. It comes from things like transparent audits that exists, that bipartisan election oversight, things like secure voting infrastructure, and that's already something that each state plans. And it's also, most of it is available to the public to see. Paper ballot backups, which almost 100% of states do right now. So you can compare it against the digital information that's put in to actual physical printout in case there's any question on the what's happening with the voting numbers. Strong cybersecurity, almost all of them, in fact, have a very strong cybersecurity protocol and process that's put into place to make sure there's no interference or there's no incidents that take place. with their voting machines and even the process of everything, which means the chain of ownership as it goes down the line and where it's stored, who has access to it, and all of these different things. The other one is public accountability, voter access protection. So all of these things kind of go into really making sure that the election is secure. Federalization is not going to do it. It's actually going to do the opposite of that. Can you imagine one branch of the United States government having control over all of these different things before anybody else actually sees it? It's a spooky perspective. It really is. So the greatest threat to American democracy, say, is not voter fraud. I mean, if you look at the numbers, they're so small that they're really not going to make a difference. And the majority of fraud that takes place during an election on both sides, right or left, is usually caught. And that is because procedures, protocols, backup backup ballots are done in physical form, and all of these things are already in place. So that's one of the things that we need to think about when we hear people like Stephen Miller. You hear things like coming out of DOJ, when you hear the president talking. Remember, all these things are in place. And imagine if the Trump administration now took control over all of these different things. Let's compare these two, right? His base might see it's safer, it's more secure. Trump is tells the truth. He is a man of integrity. And the other side may say, you know what? We've proven over time that Trump is barely truthful, almost never truthful. And so why would we trust our elections to the federal government for this, right? So, I mean, they've claimed things like repeating claims of rigged elections without evidence of anything and trying to undermine the faith of democracy and discourage participation in voting because people are disillusioned and people are thinking, well, why should I vote? My vote's not going to count. I'm not even going to show up to vote. And that's kind of one of the prongs in his idea to be able to win the elections in November. And those of you listening are probably going, well, there's a bunch of other things that he's doing as well. That's true. But this is probably one of the more dangerous things and more effective things that he's come up with this, because he may not take control or federalization of voting, but he's going to keep planting the seed of doubt, of legitimacy in voting. So it will either turn voters away, or if they do lose in November, there'll be questionable outcomes based on the seeds that he's planted and watered and started to grow in doubt of legitimacy because the left had interfered somehow or changed numbers or miscounted or flew in thousands of immigrants to be able to vote. All of these things that conspiracy theorists online tend to keep pushing all over the place. So just think about those things. It's a power grab is what it is. And when political leaders convince voters that elections are fake, they prepare the ground for rejecting legitimate results, as we've seen when he lost to Biden in 2020. In fact, it evoked a insurrection where the Capitol was attacked. And that's the power that Trump has. And that's really, really spooky. I can only remember this power in politics, in European politics in Germany during the 1940s, right around there. And I'm sure many of you will be able to agree with me on that. So we should absolutely demand a secure, transparent, and fair elections. I mean, we need to demand that, right? And there's things that we already have in place that show that we do, okay, and also tracks whether or not we are following these things like transparent auditing, bipartisan oversight, cybersecurity, voter access protection, and all of these things are already in place. So a strong democracy is built on confidence, participation, accountability, not fear, not disinformation, not decentralization of control, and not blitzing the media and social media with misinformation, which is what the Trump administration is king of, probably the only thing it's king of. So keep those things in mind. Okay, now we've gotten to our question and answer section on this. So I am just going to go through some of the chat and messaging below and see what questions we have up, and I'll do my best to answer that for you. So the first question comes from, let's see, I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, Shalaman. So Their question is, there's been a lot of talk of Trump saying federal government should take over elections. Why is that such a big deal? And let me answer this specifically because this is a very important question because it goes directly against how democracy is actually designed. The Constitution gives states power to run elections specifically to prevent centralized control. When one authority takes over, as I said a little bit earlier, it throws everything off balance and it causes things like systematic fraud and control, ultimate power of control over outcomes. I hope that answered your question. Another question here from Sally May. Sally May, that's an interesting one. Trump claims that the states act as agents of federal governments when they run elections. Is this an accurate thing? So, no, that's false, simply just false. The state does not act as an agent. I talked about that a little bit earlier, but thank you for the question. And then I've got another question here from Jojo Bobo, which is another interesting username that, and those are more entertaining than I've seen in quite some time. So the question is, Trump also says cities like Detroit, Atlanta, Philadelphia are crooked elections. What are the facts on these? Hey, those claims have been roughly investigated and debunked over and over and time again. There's been probably about 60 cases brought against these, like I mentioned earlier. And they're not true. You can look these up yourself. Simple Google, simple search. You can look up court records at they're public. They're out to the public as well. So you can review these as well. Okay, so here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hey, so I'm going to address this last question. This is from Chatty Boy. So, what actually improves election security? So, what improves it? Transparency of audits, bipartisan oversight to things, paper ballots for backup of digital electronic submission of voting, secure voting equipment that has been tested. The process of who's had control over that equipment is important. Cybersecurity upgrades, cybersecurity plan, all of these things put together, which are already there, will make sure that the voting and the measurements and the strength and the trust and the integrity in the voting systems actually exists. If the federal government takes this over, we will not have transparency. Everybody, thank you for joining Polytech. This is Dale, your host. Make sure to follow, if you like what you heard, make sure you follow us on Spotify, YouTube, Substack, TikTok, whenever they don't close down my account. And I think I said YouTube already, but I'm going to throw it in there one more time. You guys have an unbelievable Super Bowl Sunday. And most of all, enjoy the halftime show with Bad Bunny. Thank you.
Let me tell you.